Actually, very interesting talk. I think Noreen's talk actually set this up pretty well. I remember just 3-4 years ago, people debating about what is the next killer app, and I think it's pretty clear to people now. It's not so much an app as much as a technology, and I actually think web technologies is really, it's a lot of things, right? It's social media, it's the things Noreen was talking about, information, and I think on a mobile device, that access of always on, always with you, gives you an extra dimension of freedom and access to those capabilities. I mean, the ability to use services like Google Translate to translate from English to French, or to be able to use something like Google Goggles and you have a flat tire and you take a picture of it and it sends you back a video on how to fix your flat tire, or it sends you links to, based on your location coordinates, of local tow trucks or people that can help you. So I think in terms of information, I think web technologies, in a broad scope, is very, very important. I think also it's not just about the cloud. People always talk about the cloud, and that's certainly very important. It's where a lot of services will rest. But there's a lot more capability coming into mobile devices than people realize. In fact, mobile devices are pretty much at the performance of laptops just a few years ago. So very, very capable and powerful devices are coming, and I think when you use web technologies like HTML5 and JavaScript, you actually can broaden your market presence. So if you're a game developer, for example, you can use HTML5 Canvas, WebGL, and JavaScript. You write a game, your distribution for that game isn't limited by, say, iPhone or Android, because that WebGL, Canvas, HTML5 game is now sits above the OS. It doesn't care about the OS anymore. So has a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential to help developers really, really expand their total addressable market. So I run an open source project within Qualcomm Innovation Center called Web Technology. It's actually a little bit broader than WebKit, and I'll explain that shortly. I also wanted to give you a little bit of a scope for Qualcomm Innovation Center. This was a group, a wholly owned subsidiary by Qualcomm, started about a year and a half ago. And we were doing quite a bit of open source anyway. We were one of the original members of Open Handset Alliance, i.e. Android. In fact, we've shipped, I think, the most Android handsets out there today. We've shipped, as of May, I think it was around 40 Android handsets. And I think you're all aware of how Android has really, really taken off. But we had a fairly, I don't want to say ad hoc, but a whole bunch of software developers that were working in open source realm. We felt really the need to corral them and to manage the processes and how to, basically a lot of their questions, and also just to build up an expertise in this area for a lot of reasons, for our own internal sanity, you might say, as well as things like time to market. I think we all know time is money, and the whole notion of throwing software over the wall and saying catch, hasn't really gone far in a lot of people trying to ship products. So being able to get ourselves smarter on the different operating environments that our customers are using to launch their products, whether they're phones or ebooks or tablet devices. So we needed to build that open source expertise, because open source is its own expertise. It's not just a different way to do software. It requires its own processes and roles. We also wanted to be very active in contributing, and we think, with our background in all forms of technology, but especially, say, on modem and networking, we felt we had quite a bit to offer. The top icons here really represent 4 of our key projects. They're not the only projects within the Qualcomm Innovation Center, but I mentioned Android. Chrome is another area that we're working on, whereas Android is very phone-focused. Chrome tends to be more focused on larger display, netbook, and tablet-type devices. Last August, we became platinum members of the Linux Foundation. We are wanting to take a much more active role in Linux. So we have a membership on the board now. So I think you'll see, I guess stay tuned, you'll see more involvement from Quick in that capacity. And the last one is WebKit. And it's really the primary subject here, or focus of my talk. So a quick picture. I always throw this up because someone says you have 5 minutes or you have an hour. I could use whatever is necessary just with this one picture. But relative to strategy, when we talk about web technology, the centerpiece is WebKit for us. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with WebKit, but it's the basic rendering engine used in Apple Safari browser, Chrome, Android, Nokia browser, Palm's WebOS. And RIM is now developing a browser. I know of two brew projects that are using that are porting WebKit. So WebKit is the way I describe it. If you want a really simple view, imagine on one side you're feeding it HTML, you're feeding it CSS and JavaScript and images and video, and on the other side you're getting out pixels. That's overly simplistic, but that's a reasonable way to think about it. And if you think about it, if you're familiar with any form of pixel processing, that's a pretty intensive operation, especially on, let's say, a battery-constrained device. How do I manage, Hulu.com video that may be full HD resolution? So it really takes a fair bit of focus. In fact, the example I like to bring up is the next one, which is the JavaScript. WebKit comes with its own JavaScript engine, which is called JavaScript Core. We actually adopted Google's JavaScript engine. We felt it was a little bit more powerful, called V8. And this Nexus 1 device, you're probably familiar with, this was launched in February of this year, and it had a JavaScript benchmark called SunSpider. It had a score of about 15 seconds in February when it was launched. Today, we're down to about 4 seconds. Exact same hardware, no clock tuning. It's just software optimization. So, if you think of Qualcomm as a hardware company, I think now you can kind of understand how, good software can make bad hardware look good, and good hardware can make bad software look good. But bringing the two together, there's really a lot to be gained there. And again, JavaScript is very, very, very important to us. But also being able, we're moving far away from the whole WAP world of browsing. We also want to move away from, the whole mobile user agent and give people a true desktop web experience. So Flash is important. We know that's not open source, but we are doing things to optimize in the Flash area. I mentioned the networking stacks, the HTTP IP stacks are also an area that I think we have a lot to offer. When you download a website, especially over 3G, about half of the time downloading is spent on the networking side. So, we feel that there's a lot between DNS, HTTP requests, TCP, and caching that we can do to speed up people's web experience. So, give me the 5-minute hand, so I have to move a little more quickly. So moving into the trends, I actually have three trends just to put forth here. The first is HTML5, and HTML5 is a fairly ambiguous term, or at least a fairly broad term. It actually involves a number of things. I think in the simplest terms, I would say it's about giving JavaScript a lot more capability, giving JavaScript access to device APIs so it can access sensor information, geolocation information, camera, microphone, and therefore abstracting a lot of information to apps developers. And it's also about bringing more media capabilities. So one of my favorite websites is chromeexperiments.com, and there's a lot of different experiments there. And there's one in particular that's it's a video that you click off, you hit go, and it just starts running. And you can click on the mouse, click on the video, and it actually just blows up the video, blows holes in it, which is generally useless. But it actually is to illustrate a point how JavaScript can access not only individual frames of videos, but individual macro blocks. So you see the little 8x8 pixel blocks kind of breaking off like shards of glass. And so the capabilities here, again, for Canvas and for video are really, really becoming very significant and very powerful. And again, one of the beauties of WebKit, so you have all of these browsers now which are based on WebKit, whereas if you look at old web pages, you would see some code that says if it's Internet Explorer, do this. If it's Mozilla, do that. If it's Safari, do this. A lot of that sort of fragmentation is really starting to minimize, because more and more people are moving to a common rendering engine. So again, I think in the interest of time here, another trend is multi-CPUs. So you've all heard of Moore's Law. Moore's Law stopped or slowed down, let's say, or changed directions. Maybe is the right way to say it. A few years ago, I know I had a 3 gigahertz PC about 5 years ago, and I have a 3 gigahertz PC today. And people have been just adding more and more processors. And so people ask me a lot of times, they say, what can we tell, young budding software people? What looks good on their resume? And I say there's really 3 things I would recommend. Number one is, and this actually a Google person mentioned this at Google I/O, if you have open source contributions on your resume, it's a huge boost. In fact, the Google guys said that if they see that you have done some real open source contributions, you go to the head of the line in the interview process, and the interview gets a lot shorter. So definitely something to recommend. It's something people can do in their copious free time, at home, weekends. It's a little intimidating, though, because a lot of open source projects are moving 100 miles an hour, and you figure, how do I jump on this train? But, I'd say find a way to do that. Another one is learn JavaScript. If you don't, this is not so much a big issue for young developers, but for old C programmers like me, it's something to learn. And then the third thing is, brush up on your concurrent programming skills, because again, I think whether it's threads or whether it's processes, really exploiting multiple CPUs is really, really important. And unfortunately, WebKit, because when it was developed, and I think how it was developed, it wasn't really taking this trend into its mindset when it was developed. So there's static variables everywhere. But again, I think I'm not sure that fine-grained threading is really necessarily the model that we need to follow. I think multiple tabs, concurrency, 3D UIs and things, that windowing environments are going to drive a higher level of concurrency. So again, I think it'd be good to brush up on your thread programming. I think everyone's been saying this in all these sessions, and I know it's hard to read, but increased open source collaboration. I think what's really interesting to me, and I think WebKit is a pretty shiny example of open source. I think 2002 Apple started to upstream Web Core and JavaScript Core, so two subcomponents of WebKit. And by 2003, they had upstreamed the whole code. So you have this now flexible rendering engine that other people could contribute to. And there's a lot of elements of web some people don't care about. Like, I don't know, maybe Apple doesn't care about MathML or SVG or whatnot, but other people may. So depending on your interest, you can take that same rendering engine, add your own special interests, and port it to your platform. And then, of course, this was adopted a little later by Nokia and Google for both Android and Chrome, and I mentioned some of the other people earlier. I think the other interesting thing, though, is not just open tools, but open source software, but also the open tools like Git have I think really, really helped in distributed version control and source management. So again, definitely being able to manage shared, highly distributed virtual teams. There's people we work with in Hungary and India and all over the place, Israel. So these kinds of open tools are really, really helpful in strengthening this collaboration. So that was my quick thing. I hope I got through quick enough for you, Dave. But the summary is, again, just so Qualcomm is actively contributing. The stuff I mentioned, for example, on JavaScript going from 15 to 4 seconds, you can download that code from chromium.org. There's a lot of little projects, too, that aren't really projects. They're like just maybe you call them little dependent pieces. Like, for example, we did Neon is the SIMD engine inside of ARM. And we accelerated libJPEG for JPEG decoding. We accelerated libPNG. We accelerated zlib for gzip. Those are also little things that we do that they're part of web technologies. They're not part of WebKit that we upsource and make available to people for different performance improvements. And then the trends in summary, again, hardware acceleration is really, really coming, and that's really where our interest is how do we make the hardware and software work better together, lower power and so forth. And there's a ton of opportunity there. Multi-core, everyone's going to go home and work on their concurrent programming skills, and collaboration. It's going. I think it's working. So that's it. Yeah.